to hitting 10, right? Okay, so what, down to 8. So what our plan is today is we're gonna talk about classes in Python. And so this is much less of a code review and much more of a like, here is a topic in Python that we are studying. And we're doing this because I've been doing a lot of homework, a lot of Python homework, and I keep having to edit classes or write classes. And there was a question last time about how to deal with errors. And when I was thinking about it, the best way to deal with errors is to just write your code completely differently. So that is what we are going to do today. And this is a brand new computer. So A, everything should work perfectly all the time. But B, I didn't have Python installed or anything. So I will probably screw things up all the time as we do this, or my computer will. So, all right, share screen. So what we're gonna do is we'll just start by doing a little bit of scraping. Let's just say we wanna scrape like the Washington Post's homepage and grab, we'll just grab all the links off of it. Why not? So just the normal beautiful soup way of doing things. Beautiful soup response.text. So get the page, convert to a beautiful soup object. Everything's fine. Everything is normal. I'm going to cheat and I'm going to pass in my headers. Why is this taking forever? I'm gonna pass in my headers just in case we try to scrape another site later that isn't a nice site that works. Now, if I look at doc, it's everything. If I want to get links, the thing that we've talked about the past 2 weeks is instead of doing find all and finding all the links like this, our favorite way to do everything is select. So select will allow us to use CSS selectors instead of more like HTML stuff. And what that means is if I'm only looking for, like, I don't want these links up here. I only want the links that are inside of this block. I can find the div for it, which is top content, no. Where's the real content? Main content. That sounds pretty good, right? If I make this a bit wider. Okay, so what I'm gonna want is things in main content and things on the right rail and things in bottom content, whatever bottom content is. Yeah. So I'm gonna want all 3 of these things. And what is so convenient about using CSS selectors instead of using anything else is I can say, give me the div main content, give me every single link that's inside of that, but also give me right rail, give me inside the div right rail, give me every link, and inside of bottom content, give me every link. And then it'll run through and it'll give me all the links. How delightful. So let's just say we want to pull out, I don't know, every single, I don't want to make this too complicated. So we'll just get the URLs. Actually, I'll split it apart. Links and links, we'll use the list comprehension and everything is wonderful. We'll call this URLs. Okay. So if we wanted to save this to a CSV, this would actually be pretty boring to save into a CSV because I guess we would also want the text that is inside of this. So we could say texts, link, dot text for link and links, and then that would give us all this text. Oh, I'm gonna have to install pandas. All right, install pandas. So let's say we scraped all these links, we scraped all of this text, and we wanted to save it into a CSV. The easiest way to do that would be to put all of this into a pandas data frame. So we'll import pandas if it ever finishes installing down below. One day. Okay. So we have a bunch of URLs. We have a bunch of text. If we wanted to put this into a data frame, we could just do PD data frame, and URL is our URLs, and text is our text, and it's beautiful, it's amazing, everything is nice, and we can just do .to CSV, and we'll call it, I don't know, wapo.csv, index equals false. Okay, so this is everything that we have done. This is it. This is the basis of what we're going to be working with here. The idea being we pull in some URLs, we pull in some text. Actually, let's say we only want some of these links. Let's say we only want links that mention riot, Trump. What do we want to search for? Protest. These words don't show up often enough. Violence. Okay, well, let's just say we're trying to filter these links. Link for link in links. And this is something we talked about before. If, what's the word? Protest in link.text, maybe? How many do we have? That's enough. Yeah, that sounds good. Okay, so here's what we'll do. First step, pull all the links in. Next step, we're gonna filter for links that have the word protest in them. We'll also make that lowercase. And then we're gonna take these filtered links, and that's what we're gonna save. Sorry, I didn't think this through before I did it. So these are all of the URLs that are just for protests, and this is all of the text that is just for protest, and then we are gonna save it to a CSV, and we can look at it. So much fun, everything is great. We have a few links there. So the issue is, like, let's say we're doing something more complicated. Let's say we wanna, maybe let's just say we wanna do this for the New York Times too, right? So what we have done historically, if we wrote all of this code for the Washington Post and now we want to do it for the New York Times, is you just scroll up and you're like, okay, I am going to change this to be NewYorkTimes.com. And then I'm going to go to the New York Times and I'm going to figure out how to grab all of its links. So it's all inside of site content. So instead of doing this, I'm going to say no, grab everything inside of site content A, pull in all those links. And so it's the same thing that we did before, but we just had to comment out the Washington Post stuff and then put in the non-Washington Post stuff. Great. We shouldn't have saved it as WAPO. We should have saved it as New York Times. And then you're like, oh God, we overwrote our wapo.csv, so now we have to go back and we have to like run all the Washington Post stuff again and run this again because we lost it. Run that, run that, run that. and then change this to WAPO. And it's a real pain to have to go back and change all of these things all the time. So what I want you to think about, instead of how to write the code or what the steps are to do this code, is I want you to say, in an ideal world, in this magic world, where, let me open up Slack in another window so I can give you code. I don't have Slack installed on this computer yet. Hold on one second. So what I want you to think about is, if the world were perfect, and in the same way that you can do something like importing pandas or importing beautiful soup or importing requests and doing request.get, or during beautiful soup, here's a response, or doc.select, what would the code look like that you would write if there was a magic library that did everything that you wanted here? I would probably do something like, there are a few options. Scraper, I'd say I want a website scraper, and it's gonna scrape NewYorkTimes.com. And then I'm gonna say, scraper, maybe get the links that are inside of, what was it, site content? Get the links that are inside of site content, and then save CSV to NewYorkTimes.csv. Or some, literally anything. You could do anything. Is this the best way? Probably not, but it's fine. And then maybe if we did this for the Washington Post, we could say, get all the links. So do it for WashingtonPost.com, wapo.csv, and we want the links that are inside of main content, right rail, and bottom content. Right rail and bottom content. So let's just say, like, if we lived in a nice world, this is the kind of code that we would write. Does anyone have any other ideas about ways this code should be written? Is this like the worst possible approach? I'm open to other suggestions because I just made this up right now. We could also do get links with like all of the commas in there or whatever. So let's just say this is what we want to do. If I try to run this code, what happens? It breaks, of course, because this library isn't real. But let's make this library real. So every time you have a variable, or yeah, pretty much every time you have a variable when you're dealing with Python, you can do stuff to it. I can say like name equals Soma, and then I can say name.upper. Now the difference between doing name.upper and len.name is that one of these happens after my variable, and one of these happens before my variable, and you're like sending the variable to it. So you've done this stuff before. This stuff is classes. It's like, it's normal stuff that we've done in life. And so for example, let's say we had this get links thing here. If I made something called def get links, maybe it has, I don't know. We'll just leave it like that. I have something called def get links, and it just runs this code up here. This code, this code, this code. So if I do this, I can say get links, and it will go run that code and then give me something back. But we don't want to do that. We want to have some magic thing where we're able to do dot blah, blah, blah and make something happen. So in order to do this, we're going to go through a few different steps. I'm going to copy this code down here so we have our kind of idea of what we're looking to make. So in the same way that 4 is an integer and Soma is a string and this is a list, we are trying to make something called website scraper. this is called a class or a data type. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to write class website scraper. And you're like, great, I think I can probably just type pass right here and this code will work fine. Maybe even this will work. Will this work? No, no. So actually, let's work with that error message there. So I'm somehow, who knows, now website scraper is a thing. And I can say, hey, website scraper, I want to make a new website scraper that's going to scrape the New York Times, and it yells at me and it's like, website scraper takes no arguments. That just means you didn't do anything. You didn't do any work. So the worst thing about Python, if we were writing in any other programming language, what we're about to do would make way more sense. But because it's Python, it's impossibly bad. So if we want to make a website scraper, if we want to make a new website scraper and we want to send it a website to scrape, we have to write a function. And it's called underscore underscore init underscore underscore self. And you're like, okay, that makes sense. I'm sorry. Print, I made a new class. So what's happening here is we made a new kind of variable called a website scraper. And every time you make a new website scraper, it's going to automatically run this code. This is initialization code. It's actually going to give me an error when I run this because I have to say, well, let's call this URL. So here's what happens. I say, I am going to make a new website scraper. When I make a new website scraper, this code is automatically run. What does it do right now? It doesn't do anything. Why is this weird self thing here? Just because it is, and it's always going to be there. And every time we write one of these functions, self is going to be here. And this variable here, this URL goes here. So I can say, we are going to scrape URL. And when I run it, it now knows that we're going to scrape NewYorkTimes.com. So after I make a new website scraper, I want to do get links because I want it to go out and I want it to get the links that are inside of site content. So if I run this code, scraper.getLinks, I try to run it, it says, no idea what you're talking about. I've never, ever heard of getLinks. Now, in the same way that we can do name.upper, so this is called a method. And all a method is it's a function that's just kind of reversed. So instead of doing upper name, which would be like the function style way to do it, it's just put after the period. So if we want to be able to do scraper.getLinks, we just have to make a new function inside of this called getLinks. Every single time you make one of these functions inside of this new kind of variable, we have to put self in front of it. And if we're going to send it where we're going to pull all of these links from, what am I going to call this? I'm going to call this the base, the container. So I'll print, let's get some links. We're going to scrape inside of container. So when website scraper is run, it automatically does this magic initialization thing. And if I do scraper.getLinks, it magically runs this code here. And now finally, we want to do save CSV. So scraper.saveCSV, NewYorkTimes.csv. We run it. We are again going to get an error, no attribute CSV. That's because it doesn't know how to do .saveCSV. If we want to teach it to do .saveCSV, same thing we did before. Save CSV, self, file name, print. We're going to save to a CSV, print. Oh, you know what? we should have done this completely differently. We'll fix it later. We'll refactor it. Our file name is going to be file name. So I can now do two things with my website scraper. One of them is get links. One of them is .savecsv. I'll put this in Slack in case you want it. Okay, now let's actually make something happen. Oh, there's so many ways we could do this. Let's add another step here. Let's actually add another step. Scraper.download page. So when we do download page, we want it to download whatever that URL is. So it says website scraper object has no attribute download page, same as we did before. Def download page, self print, we are going to download the page. All right. So we built a website scraper. We're going to tell it to download the page. We're going to tell it to get the links, and then we're going to save all of that to the CSV. So if we want to download the page, let's just copy and paste the code that we have before, right? So when we download the page, it's just this code right here. So I'm going to paste it in here. It's going to work, but it's going to work for the wrong reason. Do I need those headers? I'll copy the headers down here too. Okay. So I'm going to shift enter. And now when it goes to download the page, it's going to take a little while. And that's because when we're running download page, this thing is happening. I don't know why it's taking so long. Now here's the problem. Right now, it's always downloading WashingtonPost.com. And you're like, oh, sorry, I forgot. I should change this to URL, right? Because we made URL somewhere else. We are downloading the page URL, shift enter, shift enter, shift enter. And it yells at me. And it says URL is not defined. Because just like when we have a function, we didn't tell it what page to download, right? We just said, download the page. And because we're arrogant, we're like, why don't you remember this page? Why don't you remember this page? Because we already told you what the URL is to download. Why did you forget this? So what we're about to do is like the important thing about classes. And it's the reason why self exists everywhere. Think of, this is something called object-oriented programming. And it's kind of the idea that our website scraper is a thing. Our website scraper is an object, and we can put stuff inside of this object. And this, we have one website scraper over here, and maybe we make another website scraper over here and another website scraper over here, and they all can have different stuff inside of them. The way that they save stuff inside of them is by using self. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna say, hey, when I make a new website scraper, I want you to save this URL into your like secret pocket where you store all of your stuff, which is called self. And every single time we want to like reach into our website scraper's pocket to find that URL, instead of just doing URL, we're gonna do self.url. Request.get self.url. Shift enter, shift enter, shift enter. No. Oh, // I'm bad at typing. Okay. So what happened here is we said, make a new website scraper. Here is the URL that we want you to scrape. And then we saved it. So now we can always talk about this URL. We can talk about it in here. We can talk about it in here. We can talk about it in here just by reaching into its like cupboard or its pocket or whatever that's called self. So if I ran get links, I could say print, let's get some links from our page self.url. And because we said self.url, it is now going to say, let's get some links from our page, newyorktimes.com. We don't have to write newyorktimes.com again because it remembers it from when we very, very, very first made our website scraper. So if I change this to washingtonpost.com, shift enter, shift enter, shift enter, it will now always remember this scraper. As long as it's this scraper, it will always remember it's washingtonpost.com. Now, here's the problem. So how are we going to get all of these links? Because we did .download page, and that downloads the page, but get links is a different method. It's a different function. So how do we access this document that we saved up here in this function? And you're like, just put it in the pocket, right? So it's the exact same thing we did before. So self.doc, and that's us saying, oh, hey, we're going to use this later. We're going to use this somewhere else. So self.doc, and then in the same way that we self.doc, select, find, let's just find all the links. We found len links URLs. Seems like a lot of printing to make it look more complicated than it is, but it's fine. So what we did was we first said, all right, here's the page we're going to scrape. Let's download this page, and then we're going to get all these links. Working hard, working slow. And it found 497 URLs. And you're like, oh, I'm an idiot because I didn't mean to scrape every single link on the page. What I wanted was something like site content A, right? And you're like, oh, wait, I gave it container, right? Because I said get links that are inside of this. So I could even do something like, I guess I'll call this selector. So I'm saying, okay, look at this container and find all the links that are inside of it. You could also do this as selector equals container plus space A, like whatever you want to do. It's up to you. So we only want links inside of a certain div. Shift enter, shift enter, shift enter, shift enter. One day. Found 0. Oh, that's because that's the New York Times selector. Let's change this to New York Times, because why not? Okay, so it found 60 URLs. Everything's great. And now we want to save the CSV. So we're saving the CSV as newyorktimes.com. Now, if we wanted all of that text, if we wanted all of those links, I'm going to steal our code from before, get every href in for link and links, for link and links. We don't have links inside of here, right? What we want to do is we want to say, oh, hey, we already got the links. We got those links elsewhere. We saved the links. We put those links in our pocket right over here. Oh, but we didn't. Self.link. So save it, put it away so we can take it out later. And then here, self.links, self.links. And then I can pd.toCSV. And I'll call this file name. So we now have save CSV, which you give it a file name. All it needs is the file name because you already got all of those links. You said website scraper. I'm gonna make a new scraper. It's gonna scrape the New York Times. I'm gonna download that page. I'm gonna get all the links inside of site content, and then I'm gonna save it to New York Times.csv. Did that work? Yep, look at all that. It looks horrible. That looks horrible. It's fine now. That's what it's supposed to be. Now, we could put all of this in one line. And we could run something like this. And you're like, great, this accesses New York Times. It tries to download the page. It tries to get this stuff, and then it saves the CSV. And the reason why this is a little bit easier is because if you had an error, let's say instead of get links just being one line of code or 2 lines of code, let's say you did a lot of transformations in here. You did a lot of like, when we looked at the scraper last week, that was scraping all of that Greek stuff, and there was so much cleaning and so much going on. Like, do you want to wrap all of that into a try except in case there's an error? Like, no, it's way easier to just say, try to do these 3 things. And if it fails, oh, sorry, I've been writing too much other languages. Just do this. So like, this is an easier way to think about the way your code is working. Now, here's the problem with the code that we've written so far. If I want to scrape the Washington Post, I would change this to washingtonpost.com, but then I still might forget to change this. I still might forget to change that, right? So it would be easier once we've written this code, when you start to write code and you change it to be structured better, it's called refactoring. And when you start to write code like this that starts to be reusable, you will refactor again and again and again, because you will end up saying, oh, hey, this is code that I've used here that if I adjusted it a little bit, made it a little more flexible, I can use it in another situation. And what I realized after writing this code is when we do, let's say beautiful soup, we can do select A, and then we can say stuff like class is blah. Or if we say df.toCSV, we can say something like index equals false. What I would really like to do in this case is when I make my website scraper, maybe I want to say it's yes, NewYorkTimes.com, and I want to say file name is going to be actually, yeah, we'll say file name equals NewYorkTimes.csv, and then selector equals site content. Like, now that I think about it, this would be something that feels nicer to me. And then I would do scraper.download page, scraper.get links, scraper.save CSV, because then I don't have to think about adding something into get links or adding something into save CSV. It's just all right there, a little bit easier to think about, a little bit easier to use. So what we want to do is I'm just going to copy and paste refactoring. Right now we have, when we make a new website scraper, we only give it one thing. This is the I'm making something. We only give it a URL. We want to also give it a file name. We want to also give it a selector. So I'm going to add two new things here, file name and selector. 99% of the time when you have a class and you're like, here's my URL, here's my file name, here's my selector. Actually, you know what a more fun way to do this would be? Is something like this. No, nah, we'll leave it like this. Okay, file name, selector. You usually just say, oh, hey, that file name, save it. That selector, put it in the pocket. Because it is self.selector, it's going to take the selector that you sent to the initializer when I said build me a new website scraper, and we're just going to be able to use it anywhere in here to do self.selector. We're going to be able to do self.filename, all this stuff. So instead of, oh, no, we'll leave it as being called selector. No, we can't call it selector. Container. We're going to make it site content A. Yeah. 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 Okay. Okay. So we're going to give it the whole selector. We're not just going to say, here's the container that you're going to use. So now that I've saved the file name into my pocket with self.filename, I don't have to have, save CSV doesn't need a file name anymore. So I can delete it. I can delete it. Or instead of file name, it's self.filename, self.filename. And forget links, instead of giving it the selector, I already gave it the selector, right? It already knows the selector. So I can do self.selector. It reaches in that pocket and it grabs them. Please work. So I'm going to scrape the New York Times. I'm going to find everything inside of site content A, save it to this file name. Please work. Great. Now, why did I say file name equals and selector equals, right? Because before I just wrote that file name, or I just wrote that URL there, and I didn't say URL equals, right? Why couldn't I have just done it like this, like a normal function that happens to take 3 arguments? And the answer is you totally can do that. It totally works the same way. It's just that when you are using a function, sometimes it's easier to just give everything names. I could also say URL equals newyorktimes.com, and then I can put these in any order that I want, and I don't have to think about what the order is, right? So I can put file name first, and it works just the same because it matches it up based on these names. So it takes file name equals and makes it file name, URL equals, makes it URL, selector equals, makes it the selector. So you're like, why would you ever do this? And I say, well, right now we could scrape, let's say WAPO, WAPO.csv, WashingtonPost.com, and we'll just save everything inside of main content. Did it not save my CSV? Oh, it's still waiting. Okay. Now, before we were filtering in order to say we only want stuff that has the word protest in it, right? If I wanted to change this to only look at things that had the word protest in it, if I wanted to write my ideal code, because you should always start from here's the code that I want to write, I would want to write something like text filter is protest, right? If I try to run this code, it's going to yell at me. It's going to say, you can't do that. It's going to say, you can't do that because I don't know what text filter is. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to do the same thing I did every other time. Along with filter, I'm going to say, or selector, I'm going to say text filter and self.textFilter equals text filter. So I'm just taking that variable and I'm putting it in my pocket so I can use it later. And so if you think about where is the point where we would use this text filter? And it's probably when we get these links, right? So right now, we're saying take all of the links and then save them. And now I'm going to say, no, you know what? Let's take those links, link for link and self links. We only want to take the ones if link.text, if protest in link.text lower. So let's only take the links with the word protest in them. So we're using a list comprehension to filter, as we've done the past few weeks. And you're like, wait, Soma, it's not always protest, because sometimes we're going to change this word, right? Because like sometimes we want protest, sometimes we want Trump, whatever. And I say, oh, right. How do we talk about that filter? Where did we save that filter? Can we just say text filter? No. When we created our web scraper, we saved it in our magic pocket called self. So we're going to say self.textFilter. So it's a complicated way to kind of do the exact same thing we were doing before, where we filtered it to only have whatever that text filter is. So Shift Enter for protest. Great, I found 4 URLs for protest. I can now do the same thing for Trump. And so, bam, this is probably the best reason why you should write things in classes, is because if you want to make small changes to the code that you run, all I had to do was change protest to Trump, and I have everything, right? Now, here's where things will get even more exciting, What if I wanted all of the links on the page? Let's say I don't want a text filter. I don't want to filter anything. Shift Enter, it's going to yell at me. It's going to say, yo, dog, you were supposed to give me a text filter, but you did not give me a text filter. You were supposed to give me this variable called text filter, right? You were supposed to give me this. Where is it? And I'm like, just ignore it. And it's like, I can't ignore it. I have to put something inside of that variable. And I'm like, okay, well, look, if I don't give you anything, just make it be none. Just make it be nothing, right? And it's like, huh? All right, I guess that's okay. So I'm going to Shift Enter and I'll run this again. It allowed me to build the scraper. It allowed me to download the page. But when I started to download, or when I started to get the links, it yells at me. It says, get links isn't working. Something is wrong here. In string requires string as left operand, not none type. And you're like, A, I have no idea what this means. But B, it's something about none and something about a string. What is happening is when I'm trying to use this filter, what is this filter? Oh, right. Because I didn't tell it what the filter was going to be, the filter is none. So I'm saying is nothing inside of this text and it's like, I don't know what you're trying to do. So I can say, if there is a filter, run this code. Print, found a filter, filtering our links, else, didn't find a filter, not filtering our links. So now based on what we created, or the way that we created our scraper when we very first scraped, or when we very first initialized everything, it will now do different things. So shift enter. For this one, it says found a filter, filtering our links, delightful. For this one, shift enter. It found a filter, filtering our links, because we said filter it by Trump, found 5 URLs. This time, it did not find a filter, did not filter the links, so you get all 60, and then it magically works. So that was, that's classes in theory. If we wanted to get technical, or if we wanted to explain this in the like traditional way people talk about classes, they're very much love to talk about it being like objects that have actions that they can do. So our scraper is an object, and every single thing that it can do, as we've seen, we have to write that as a function inside of here. So we write that as a function, we write that as a function, we write that as a function. And as a result of these functions, like to use download page, we don't do download page scraper. We don't do save CSV scraper. Because they are inside of this class, that is what allows us to do scraper, download page, scraper, whatever. And in fact, we could make this even more exciting. This is the last thing we're going to do. And then you all can ask me questions if you have questions, or maybe this is just a terrible explanation, but that's fine too. So I think it's stupid that we download the page before we get the links. Because like, obviously, if we get the links, we're going to have to download the page first, right? So what we can actually do is, I'm going to delete this right here. I'm going to say, hey, when we get the links, how do we know? Well, actually, let's just try to run this code. If we try to run this code without downloading the page first, it yells at us because it's saying, hey, what the fuck is doc? I have no idea what doc is. Self.doc. I looked in my pocket and there's nothing there called doc. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say, hey, if there's nothing called self.doc, go download the page. And you're like, what? And I'm like, yeah. So in the same way that file name is in our pocket and selectors in our pocket and text filter and all of these things are in our pocket, and I can get these variables, I can also go talk to methods or functions that are inside. So I can say, hey, if there is no doc here, go try to download the page. This might actually not work, but we'll see. If, what's the way to do this? If doc not in self. Oh, actually, I know the way to do it. When we first make our scraper, I'm going to manually say, put a thing in your pocket, call it doc, but set it equal to nothing. So that then if we try to get links and this is still nothing, we can go download the page. So print, we haven't downloaded the page, downloading now, else, we already downloaded it. So when we made our website scraper, we said, make sure we don't have any document already. And then when we try to get the links, we say, hey, do we have a document here? If we don't, go download the page. It downloads the page, it downloads the document, then it can get all the links. So now when we run this, get links, we're going to scrape those links. We haven't downloaded the page, download it, done, filters the link, saves it. So now we can keep doing stuff like .get links, and it's not going to download the page again because it's already downloaded the page. Whew. All right. So that was called, I've never talked about classes in my life. Questions?
Do we always name the first function init?
So the only time you don't need init is if you are not giving the website scraper anything. So for example, another way we could have done this is and I'm just going to call this something else. So what we could do is say something. Oh no, it doesn't like it. What's it not like? Oh. So now I could say something, oh, sorry, do a thing. So I could do that. But usually the usefulness of having a class is when you create a new instance of it. When I create, like, just like when I create a new string, I want to give it some text. When I create a new number, I want to give it some text inside. You usually want to have init so that you can set stuff up. Because if you don't have init to set all of this stuff up, like, there's not really a good reason why you're using a class. But no, you don't need it. It's just specific situations where you don't. But usually it's useful.
I've read about another function which is called main. Is it the class thing instead of init?
Hold on a second. You're a little quiet because my monitor is very quiet. Try that again.
Is there another function which is called main function? Is it the same with init or is it something independent?
Oh, wait, main, like this thing?
Yes.
Yeah, so what main is if you are running a Python script from the command line, it will look at this variable to see so what happens is when you're running a code from the command line, you have this code, this check right here that says, hey, are you running this from the command line? If so, do some things. So it's not necessarily a function named main. People like to name things main. But the only important part is if you're running something from the command line, in order to say, is this being run from the command line, you say if name equals, or if name equals underscore underscore main. And there's nothing that, like, that's doesn't have anything to do with the way that a class works. But it has underscore underscore there because that's the way that Python talks about, like, secret stuff, I guess. So for example, if I have pandas here and I'm like, what version is pandas? I can do underscore underscore version and it will tell me the version. I could say, what, beautiful soup? No. Requests underscore underscore version and it'll tell me the version. Requests underscore underscore, you know, copyright. So it's just, what is got cake? Huh, that's fun. So yes, underscore underscore just means this is secret stuff that normal people shouldn't do, but because we're better than normal people, we do it. Anything else?
There are questions in the chat.
There are questions in in Zoom chat. Oh boy, oh boy. Let me open, four things. I'm the worst. Okay. Why do we do file name equals? Okay, yes. So I talked about that. So I could do this as, if I put these in the same order, what did I do? It's URL file name selector, URL file name selector. I just like to do it explicitly because if you add more things or remove more things, you just don't have to worry about order anymore. And it just makes it easier to read, I think, because by giving everything good variable names, you are better able to kind of know, know what everything is there for. So this works too. These are called arguments, argument names, to keep more organized. Why go object-oriented instead of writing a couple of independent functions with the same parameters? You can do it whatever way you want, honestly. I like to write things object-oriented. Well, okay. It ends up being a case of, do you want to keep track of a bunch of different variables, and do you like to send things back and forth to functions a lot? So for example, I could write, I could have sent the file name, I could have sent the selector, I could have just had literally a thing where I say, the text filter is Trump, my selector is site content, my file name is newyorktimes.csv, I'm a New York Times or URL. My URL is this, and I could put like all of my scraping code right here, and it would be the exact same thing. I just have to go back up to the top, change this to Washington Post, whatever. Yeah, there's no good reason if this makes more sense to you, or if this method of writing it makes perfect sense to you, it's fine, do that. But the one reason to write things like this is, yes, to save things as a Python file and then do it separately. So for example, I'm going to take website scraper and I'm going to create a new text file. I always forget how to do this. I'm going to paste all the code in here. I'm going to call this scraper.py. And now I'm going to make, actually inside of here, nope. Inside of scraper.py, I need to import pandas as PD. From BS4, import beautiful soup and import requests. So I'm going to save my class there. And then here, let's see if I can do this correctly on the first try. From scraper, import website scraper. Damn it. Oh, wait, it almost worked. I just wrote code wrong. Okay. So from scraper, import website scraper. And now I can write and now there we go. I can magically run this without having all of that extra code there. So yes, that is a perfect question about doing this as a self-written library. So yes, that is probably the best reason to do this stuff if you write something that is reusable enough. And you could write like 1,000 different little files. For example, this is my new computer, so I actually don't have all of my homework from last semester on it. But what I would do is if I had a bunch of functions that were really, really boring, that took up a lot of space, that were for like cleaning data, I would make a text file and I would call it like utils.py, and I'd have like capitalize and make it big and backwards, text.upper.reverse, or whatever. And so I'd write all of my functions in this .py, or I would actually write them maybe in a notebook first and then move them into the py. So then I could do from utils, it automatically goes, when I say from utils, it knows to look at utils.py. I can say import this function, and it can't do reverse. Fine then. I'll import it again. Kernel restart. The problem with doing imports is that you have to restart your kernel usually in order to do things like that. So yeah, do you have to put it in the same folder with our code? I always forget how to do this. There's like really complicated ways of doing it involving like files named init.py and stuff like that. If you want to learn how to do this, writing libraries in Python, there's a pretty good walkthrough that's actually in, writing modules. So in the Python documentation, it actually is a pretty good walkthrough of how to do this. And you can give it different paths to look for things in. So let's say you always put all of your utility functions inside of like users, Soma, development, Python functions, or something like that. I can say also look for libraries inside of this folder. But oh God, it gets terrible. So yeah, you can put it wherever, but I would probably recommend keeping it in either the same folder that you're working in. Yeah, just put it in the same folder, or build a module, which is kind of a pain, but it's probably best if you keep it in the same folder. Other questions? So yeah, you can live your entire life not writing classes in Python, but I think if you force yourself to, if you're writing something that has several steps, trying to write it in a class-based way ends up being, it's a good exercise to make you better later on when you might need to, or start writing class-based things before you need to, and then you'll see instances where it might be useful. Because like this is kind of a contrived instance where like I actually would not write code that looks like this, but it's good enough. What I might actually do in this case is put get links at the end of init. So all I would really have to do, here, let me do it this way too. So if I said, hey, when I create my scraper, just get the links without anyone even asking. I could then do scraper equals website scraper. I'll just cut and paste all that stuff because I don't want to type it again. So when I ran this code here, because I put get links at the bottom of init, it's automatically going to go out and get the links. And then in order to save it, all I need to do is .save CSV. Yeah. Anything else? All right. This was not what I would call my ideal explanation to how classes are, but I think that I learned a lot about how to explain classes and the bad ways to explain classes. So look forward to me making another video in the future that is potentially a better explanation than what you got today.
I have a
All right.
question.
What's
Can I
that?
fire a last question in?
Yeah.
If let's say that you import your library and then it doesn't work for some reason, is debugging your script an issue? Like, how exactly would you go about? I feel like it would make the process of debugging it even more complicated.
Well, usually what I would do, I mean, so there are probably right ways to do this, and I always do this in like the bad way, which is I open up my scraper.py file, and at the bottom of the file, I pretty much just write all of my test cases. And so all of that code that we had in the notebook, I would just write it here in order to test. And I would keep running this file from the command line in order to see what the errors are. Because then, like, I would just do Python scraper.py again and again and again until it started working. Just because debugging, you probably shouldn't be debugging your library from here. You should be debugging it in something where you're more really just working with the library instead of working with your code as a whole. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Any other
Great.
last questions?
We've always wanted to learn about classes. So
Yeah,
thank
now you know everything about them. I mean, it's not like they're not necessary for anything, honestly. If you're writing a library, if you're writing something that's like really crazy, sure. But the reason why I thought about this was because it would be, I was thinking about for all of that, where is it? When there was the code that kept having like, if this is Greek, do it like this. If it's in English, do it like this. I was thinking where if you made this, you could just say like lang equals gr or lang equals en, and then it might make things easier. But then in the end, I was like, no, I think it's actually all the same because you still have to do all of those if statements. There's more advanced things you can do with classes, but yeah, that's your basics. You don't really need them, but now you know a little bit about them. All right.